This is meant to be a very short, a very tiny talk, and it's meant to be a transitional talk. First we had introductory talk or two, and then we went into the transcendental of transcendentals, trying to experience and understand as much as we can with the concrete consciousness that we have the experience of Christ as the life spirit. Having not done so well at that, maybe it's better to come a little bit down to earth. The two talks that follow this will be more on our work of preparing ourselves to be true servants of Christ. So we have to have a transition in between there, and I took a little bit of liberty with the English language in calling the talk upliftment. But I suppose we should get on. Somehow, some of the worst experiences or the strangest experiences are the ones you remember the most. Over 30 years ago, I took it was mandatory, I took a U.S. history course in college, and I learned all kinds of things in it that were useful and mostly unuseful. But the professor was a very rigid analyst, and he was an iconoclast. And he tried to destroy all of the most sacredly held notions that people had about history, which he considered superstitions. And when he got them out of the way, he felt that then he could really do historical analysis. And he saved his greatest irreverence for the character of Abraham Lincoln. And he used to tell stories about that were common on the frontier, about how Abraham Lincoln walked 10 miles to see a prostitute, and when he got there he discovered that he had forgotten his money, and the prostitute said to him, "That's all right, Mr. Lincoln, you can have credit." To which Lincoln is reputed to have said, "I don't believe in credit." To which the lady was to have said, "Why, Mr. Lincoln, you're the most moral man I've ever known." But for me, the most interesting part of the entire course was when the Civil War was studied. Because when we came to the Civil War, all sorts of viewpoints and all sorts of interpretations about the Civil War were put forth. There was a cultural interpretation, and there was the moral interpretation, and there was a geographical climatic interpretation, and there was a linguistic interpretation. And the one the professor preferred was obviously the economic interpretation, Charles Beard and people like that. But though I didn't really care that much for the course, that stuck with me. Because what happened is what often happens in spiritual philosophy. Everybody that had an interpretation of the Civil War felt their interpretation was the true interpretation, the exclusively true interpretation. And being sort of an innocent, I could see where all of them had something to do with it. But the course stuck with me, and that is quite a bit how I have come to see life, especially life in the mysteries. That the spiritual truths that we are given, the philosophy that we are given, has an almost infinite number of points of view that you can look at it from. And some of those points of view seem to be more valuable than others, but all of them are fruitful. We have in our philosophy probably one of the most fruitful things that the human mind can be put to, because everywhere you look, you strike gold. And that's really... So from that I came to realize that for every incident or for every consequence, there's more than one cause. There are a number of contributory causes. I think if we were even capable of doing a total retrospection, that we would see our lives from many, many points of view, the same things. You know what I'm trying to say? I think this is part of the reason why it takes us so long in between lives. Because it wouldn't be that much. You know, you can go to a thriller movie or something like that, and you can go through a whole bunch of feelings within a short hour and a half. But the big work that we do in between life is that what we have reaped here is enormously full in meaning. And so we have to dissolve it, and we have to see all of these points of view. Because if you think about it, we've only had science now really for about 4 or 5 centuries, and science in terms of the simplest things of everyday life has only scratched the surface as far as explanation. It's asserted itself very much through technology to do as much as it could to destroy all the wonder of the world, but we all want those things, I guess. Now, these same things, you know, that in history, some events are more important than other events. Clearly, in the history of the United States, the Second World War is a much more important event than a tick falling off a tree on a dog or a deer or something like that. It had a lot to do. You know, I actually believe that the Elder Brothers precipitated the Second World War. Yes, because if you look in the whole of the 20th century, for a 6-year span that has as many positive aspects, especially as many positive spiritual aspects as there are, that you can only find that in the period of the Second World War. And I literally believe they knew it was coming, and they brought it about at that time because they realized that we could reap the most spiritually out of it, because there was so much that was so positive in the air, and they saved us from what might have been a terrible outcome. But that was a very big turning point in United States history, because before the Second World War, we were still up-and-comers, and we always cheered for the underdog. But since the Second World War, we believe we're on top. You know, everywhere you go, you see we're number one. We're number one. In a way, it's almost sad that there is no longer a second world. It's all the first world and the third world now. And that's kind of sad. But at any rate, we're talking about big turning points in history. The same thing is true in the cosmos. There are very, very important moments in the cosmos as well. Clearly, the birth of the cosmos must have been as important as our birth into the physical world. But that's not the moment we're looking at. We're looking at the moment that is the central turning point of all of evolution. From when we, in our part in it, turned from being creatures to becoming creators. When we were takers because the gods gave everything into us, to givers. When we take the gods out of us and pass them on as creative spiritual principles to the beings below us. Now, we've been looking at that moment for quite a bit in these talks. We've looked at it mostly in terms of time, in the triad of time, space, and change associated with periods, globes, and revolutions. But time itself is triadic. There's past, present, and future. And what we do in the changes, that's also triadic: involution, evolution, epigenesis. Or we have causes and consequences hinging on events. Now, there are many ways of looking at this triad of time, space, and change. Historians, for example, some historians believe that everything is accomplished by time, Some believe everything is accomplished by place, and some believe that everything is accomplished by people. Some say that Athens was great because of the time. Some say that Athens was great because of the place. The Mediterranean was warm and they were right on the sea. And still others believe that Athens was great because of the people. Probably all of those had something to do about it. And this brings up an interesting little anecdote. It's a little embarrassing for me. In the city that I live, there have been a number of prominent modern spiritual philosophers that have lived from time to time. And in the early 80s, David Spangler, who is a very, very good thinker and a clairvoyant, and he reads good literature. He was the Findhorn philosopher, if you remember. He's the clairvoyant that showed up, that came from Madagascar. But he was living in Madison, and when he was living in Madison, maybe because of when he was living in Madison, he gave in a public talk, he gave out that he thought that Madison, Wisconsin was going to be the capital of the New Age. That may have been because he thought he was living there. That's neither here nor there. And at the same time, there was an astrologer living in town that was the, I think, head of the board of directors of the Geocosmic Research Society. Geocosmic is a fancy way of saying astrology. And he took the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, the first one in the Aries signs, I believe it was 1981. He took that as the beginning of the Aquarian age. So we had the time and the place, and not to be outdone by either of them, I publicly proclaimed the person. I declared myself king of the Aquarian age. And that's what they both wanted to do in the first place, but I thought I would beat him to the punch on the whole situation. But you get the idea that there is something, that all of these things, its time and its place. We're going to go into this very deeply tomorrow if we can, because tomorrow's talk may be the deepest of all of the talks. But I am going out for dinner tonight and reading in the chapel tomorrow, so I may not get a chance to prepare. And I've never been humiliated in a series of talks as much as I have in this series, because everything that I've wanted to say, the really rare things, I've been unable to live into words. And I learned a really big lesson. I learned not to try to do too much, because I put at least 20 hours I've put into each hour of talk here. And I did too much, and because of that I can't get in touch, with the really rare stuff. And maybe my father was right when he said I had big nails in my head, or my mother when she said your eyes are bigger than your stomach. And this time it turns out that my eyes are bigger than my ability to talk. But this turning point, we can look at it in terms of time a number of ways. We can say it is a period of a few hundreds of thousands of years. And the place is on Earth, because on Earth is where we have put ourselves in this cosmic quarantine, where we're focused only in the outer world. And obviously, the beings are humanity. If we wanted to focus down narrower, we're doing sort of like I like to go to the movies a lot, and I love cartoons. And one of my favorite ones is a Speedy Gonzales cartoon. If you know who Speedy Gonzales is, Speedy Gonzales is the little mouse that beats up El Gringo Pussycats. And one of my favorite cartoons that illustrates this is you see this starry night and you hear this raucous Mexican music and you hear a lot of celebration, and then it focuses in on the solar system, and then it focuses in on the Earth, and then it focuses in on the Southwest, and then it focuses in on a sleepy town, and the town is completely asleep. And then it focuses in on the cantina, and in the cantina there's a little mouse hole with swinging doors on it, and and in and out are passing all kinds of inebriated mice, and eventually El Gringo Pussycats tries to crash the gate, and it's Speedy Gonzales to the rescue. But you see what we're doing, we're focusing down. We could say it's hundreds of thousands of years, or we could say it is in the middle of the post-Atlantean civilizations. There were about 3.5 before the time of Christ and about 3.5 after. All of those that came like the Caesar and Alexander the Great, they were bringing that union of East and West right about the time that Christ was to come. Or we could say, we could really locate the time down to the 3 years ministry. And if we wanted to get really small about it, we could focus it all on the crucifixion. So we're at that point again. We're at the point where the angels ascend and descend on the figure of Christ Jesus. Now, this was not a happenstance event. It was a very planned event, and it was an event that was extremely momentous. And we've looked at a number of things of significance, and I want to continue to look at that, because this really did depend on the person. It required, as we saw in the third talk on Jesus Christ and Christ Jesus, we saw that the conditions really required a very special being. And that special being was the only being. It was a composite being, Christ and Jesus. It required that special being to accomplish this work. But the work wasn't done then. The work is still being carried out. And that basically is our topic, or has been quite a bit of our topic all along, and that is the work of Christ. Now, this is an immense subject. We could go on and on about what the things of the work of Christ are. Much has been written and much has been spoken about the work of Christ. I like the way the Rosicrucian Fellowship does it. The work of Christ is sometimes hinted at in one word or 3 or 4 words in a row, and it then becomes our work. And we are to think it out, to live it out, and create ourselves. Because this is the beautiful thing. You look, there are a lot of spiritual philosophies where people are told everything that they're supposed to do and everything, every little detail about their spiritual life. There's no freedom in that. And there's no creativity in that. If we're becoming creators, we have to learn to create. And Max Heindel did wonderful works for us, but the greatest work is that he left us with a cosmic conception for us to work out. Because as beautiful as his thoughts are, they can't nourish creativity in us unless we do our own thinking. In the same way that the food that he ate couldn't sustain us, neither could his thinking. We have to do our own thinking, and we have to come alive, and that's what our activity is all about. So we're going to try and do a little bit of creative thinking about one aspect of the work of Christ. Some of the works of Christ that are indicated by the cosmic conception are the redeeming of that which was lost, the opening of initiation to all, the bringing of the cleansing blood, the inauguration of the greater mysteries, which means something different than it did to the ancient Greeks. What the ancient Greeks call the greater mysteries, we would call the lesser. And the beginning of the spiritualization of matter. And we talked a little bit the other night that Christ inaugurated the backward spinning, that in the whole second half of evolution there is the unspinning at the same time that there is the forward spinning, the principle of retrospection. We're probably going to touch a little bit on all of those works, but the one work that we most want to look at is the work of upliftment. And I did that because it seems to be one of the central things that the biblical Christ mentions in the Gospel of John. The biblical Christ, I differentiate, for those, there are a number of people that haven't been here for the earlier talks. I differentiate between Christ as in the Bible and Christ as living right now in the cosmos. And the one that is in the Bible has become stylized and to some extent, very much misused. But the biblical Christ said something to the effect that if I be lifted up, I will lift up the world with me. And that's what we're going to look at. Because, again, even in upliftment, we have a topic that is very, very huge. Something that I don't think we could have a whole series of talks on upliftment. Normally, when we think of upliftment, we think of it in a Jupiterian sense. We think of lofty thoughts and someone coming along with a smile and slapping you on the back and having something positive to say, something edifying. And certainly Christianity and Christian mysticism is no disappointment in that respect. The biblical Christ and the living Christ are filled with positive things, and just like looking at the experience of Thomas à Kempis in The Imitation of Christ, amazingly uplifting the dialogue that he had with the Christ within and how he was uplifted. Well, we are all firelings, we're children of fire, and we're looking for something more direct. And we're looking for something more direct that answers to our minds, because we are thinking people, and the vacuum, as we have said in earlier talks, that is in the heart of the archetypes is an attitude of questioning. It is that questioning that draws the archetype together and has the hollow questioning center, which answer comes from the life spirit, which answer comes from the human spirit, and that is that kind of dialogue of Thomas à Kempis. But let's begin to look at upliftment through one of the other mysteries, and that is the mystery of the work, I should say, of the cleansing blood. And this will be review for the most part. We know that we are created even physically to some extent in the image of God. We have a physical body, and God has a physical body, but God's physical body is quite a bit different than ours. Looking from the side, looks something like that. Looks like a flying saucer, a ball in the center, and a disk around it. And in that disk are all the planets. And wherever there is a physical planet, that's part of the physical body of God. You might say that there are a lot of wide spaces, and God is very double-jointed, but it's true. So their macrocosm and microcosm are pretty much the same. When we get to the desire body, they're even more the same. We know that in a human being, that the desire body, our physical body is suspended in the desire body. And the desire body is made of the stuff of feelings and emotions. Very fluidic. You know how your feelings can race through a whole sequence of feelings in a flash of a second. And within this fluidic, emotional, desire, feeling body, there are vortices. The primary vortice is located in the area of the liver, at the seed atom of the desire body, and from that vortex, feeling flows out into the desire body, and it is drawn in at various other vortices at various places, associated with various places in the body. And these eddies or vortices are activated, or the feelings are drawn in according to what we are desiring in the external world. Now, in the macrocosm, this is also true, that the planets and the planetary spirits have great desire bodies. So a little bit different in that the vortices in the planetary desire bodies both draw in and come out in both in both senses. They're both inpouring and outpouring. That's because the nature of the planetary spirits is they're not takers as we are. They're totally givers, and they can pour out on all levels of desire, and I assume that it'll be that way with us also. Eventually, the desire stuff is recycled just as it is recycled in our bodies. But to a certain extent, some of the desire material is fresh and new. It comes from the zodiacal hierarchies, and you might say that each of the planetary spirits has a tone that is all of its own, and it outpours emotional material, new, fresh, cleansed emotional material of a given quality. So that Mercury is mercurial, and Mars is martial, and Venus is Venusian. And when that pours, the desire bodies of the planets overlap each other, and so they flow into each other. And then that flows into the cosmos in an astrological way, so that new desires are available to us, and most people respond to these desires by astrological waves. You know, there are fads and fads of feelings and fads of neuroses that people go through, and those are when that kind of stuff is being poured into the desire world. Now, remember we took the picture the other night, and we related to the ancient mysteries idea of creators, emanators, and fabricators. We as human beings are fabricators, and we take from the macrocosmic desire body and we make our desire bodies out of it. And in this sense, we could almost look at the quality of feeling comes out something like what we experience when we look at color. And in this extent, what comes from the macrocosmic, the fresh new desire material that comes from the macrocosmic desire bodies, collectively the desire body of God, is sort of like fresh colored paint out of the tube. And we paint with that, and we take it into our lives. Only this, I don't want this to be too much of an external picture because it's within ourselves. Now, we haven't been such good painters. And you know how it is when you work with oil paints. If you work with them for a while, that vivid color becomes murky. And to some extent, humanity, by its selfishness, brought in a lot of the Saturnine quality. Remember, we have said that the fall of humanity was not the sexuality. That was the energy that was perverted. It was the selfishness in perverting that energy. And we all know that Saturn is down in the darker colors, and if perverted into hate, it becomes black, and you put black together with any color and it makes it murky. And so we murkied up the desire world and our desire bodies. Now, my goodness, I'm probably lost again. Yeah, I'm not too far lost. But at the baptism by John, a great remedy was brought to us in that Christ, being the highest initiate of the Sun period, was master of desire material. And when we accepted Christ as one of us, in the way we have unusual ways of initiating people into becoming human, we initiated Christ by killing him. It was important for Christ to be killed because Christ had to know what it felt like to fear death. And fear, you can't help somebody if you don't know what their experience is like. And so in order to help us, Christ had to be accepted as one of us. But at the crucifixion, Christ brought in his desire body into the earth. And when it was brought into the earth, it not only helped the desire body of the whole earth be clearer and more filled with love but it allowed us, because we made Christ one of us, it allowed each of us individually as human beings access and an example of those kinds of emoting and desiring. So that any time that we accept the love of Christ, and any time that we accept Christ into our lives in a very intimate, peer-to-peer way, we can cleanse our desire bodies, we can rebuild our desire bodies. In short, we can emote differently than we have before. Clearly not everybody has accepted it, and a lot of people have chosen to struggle against it, but that's freedom. But it's a peer-to-peer access that we have. It's not surprising, since most of the activity of Christ, especially being the highest initiate among the archangels, would function in the higher part of the desire body, which we know is the regions of soul life, soul light, and soul love. And it's not surprising that shortly after the crucifixion of Christ and Christ's desire body was made available to us, it's not surprising that just a few hundred years there was art everywhere. That's the region of soul life. And it was probably the greatest period of art that the world has known so far. The region of soul light, that region of altruism, we haven't come into that yet. The timing for that, I think, is to be coming fairly shortly. All of the experiments that we've had in altruism so far have been in communism and socialism, and that got mired down in materialism rather than in an ideal. But I suspect maybe the first opportunity will come when the Uranus gets back into its own phase with the Pluto cycle, because Pluto represents the extreme right, the extreme reactionary quality, whereas Uranus represents the extreme left and the extreme altruistic. We've been talking about Uranus several times during these talks. So maybe in the latter part of the first quarter of the 21st century we'll have a big splash of altruism, just in the same way we've had a big splash of art. Okay, we can see then that Christ literally had a major effect on our desire bodies, and can have an even greater one if we try to say to ourselves, how would Christ feel about this? Every time we do that, or every time we literally love Christ, we'll have more of that come peer-to-peer into our desire bodies. In a similar way, we could say that Christ affected all of our bodies. We talked in the talk about Jesus, we said that the central archetype of all archetypes for humans is has to do with the archetype of creating creative thoughts, and that the most human of all humans was Jesus in his humility, and that humility was the tone, and not just mental questioning, that brought him close to that central archetype. So when we have the being of Christ Jesus, since then we no longer have to, in our in-between lives when we build our minds, we don't have to emulate somebody like Socrates, who probably has influenced more thinkers you read everywhere throughout history. Even Benjamin Franklin, I was talking about the other night, he tells like how he tried to play Socrates. When I was young, I tried to play Socrates. And the very fact that we modeled our minds after that. A lot of people try to model their minds after Einstein. Since the incarnation of Christ into the body of Jesus, we can model our mind after the mind of Christ. This is one of the things the creative thinking was made available to us. Now, we could do this with all of the bodies, but I don't want to do that. We could look at it in the ideational mind, as we did in the earlier transcendental talks. And as much as I love transcendentalism, I don't want to get infected with the Platonism where you only are up in the abstract. because our work is here. And so I want to look a little bit, in fact, for almost all the rest of the talk, because this is where the work of Christ is greatest, is in the ethers and in our vital body. We've been saying all along that the only way we can really get out of ourself, and the only way we can get out of our egoism, is to transcend to the experience of Christ, which is beyond the self. And that way we get beyond that horrible, horrible problem that bothers us all the time because we're too self-conscious and we get in the way of the good that we could do. And we've been looking at an example all along of looking on the things of others. But again, I'd like to look at things not only from looking at the viewpoint of how other people look at the experience of life, but especially as Christ looks at them. Now, the experience of Christ coming into the vital body of Jesus is a momentous experience because it's a very, very unique experience. We are in this process called an evolutionary creation. And in this process, the threefold spirit projects itself into the unknown of matter. And it projects itself so that in matter, what occurs is a reflection of each of the attributes of the spirit. The whole thing is called reflective projection. We're going to talk a lot about it tomorrow. And currently, though the cosmic conception seems to indicate in several places that the focus of the reflective projection changes, currently the divine spirit is reflectively projected into the dense chemical region of the physical world, and the life spirit, which Christ is the focus and the synoptic representative of, is focused reflectively into the ethers. Now, that means that Christ is the living representative of the life spirit. If you think about this, at the baptism by John, when Christ entered the vehicles of Jesus, he entered the vital body of Jesus and entered the etheric world. Can you imagine what that was like? That was like a stupendous déjà vu for Christ. Because previously, for Christ, it was a matter of being reflectively projective in the ethers. That the ethers represented something in the life spirit. But now, for the first and the only time in our cosmos, the life spirit gets focused directly inside the ethers. And you might say that this was a remarkable incarnation for something that you've known as an expression of you, because you might say that it was almost like the life spirit by its life can do things that reflect into the ethers, but it isn't inside of it. You know what I'm trying to say? And that incarnation for the Christ must have been a stupendous experience. Now, because of that, this is a unique thing in our cosmos, a very unique thing. Our sin was a very unique thing. And so the salvation that is required was a very unique thing. And so from the viewpoint of Christ, this is a gift for Christ. The ability to bring the life spirit right inside the ethers. Now, we have to understand this in what this means for us. This means, in a way, that literally the life spirit lives or has a direct focus into our etheric vital bodies. We call it the Christ within, and there's a place in the Heindel's writings where, it almost makes your hair stand on end, where he describes actually the clearest description I've ever seen of the experience of the Christ within. I don't want to spoil that. But this means to us that we don't have to be that advanced as to always have the transcendence of transcendence into the life spirit, which very, very few people have the Christ consciousness experience, and very rarely and very momentarily. We don't have to have that in order to benefit from Christ. This means that every time we have the Oranian type of intuition, that is, we don't need to know why, we just feel the love of Christ, and we know that something is true, and we act on it. We do these kinds of deeds of service. This is what is possible to us once the life spirit... So that doesn't mean to say that there wouldn't have been intuition otherwise, but the intuition has direct access into the ethers, and the more we develop our etheric vital body, the more we can hear that directly without having to work extremely hard and get to the point of having the transcendence of transcendence. Now, not only has this changed the vital body of individuals, it has changed the vital body of the earth. And I want to talk about that in a very unusual way, and there's a reason why I'm doing that. I won't disclose all the reasons because that would be too long of a side trip. One of the little reasons is I've been teaching a course now for a couple of years on mythology and the mysteries, and it's been one of the joys of my life. I've always wanted to do it. When I lived here, I had piles of mythology books, and now I probably have probably about 25 running feet of mythology and fairy tale books, and because it talks to me. But because I believe that the essence that is in the myths has to come out in the mysteries. It has to be lived out in our lives. And we've talked about that in some of the earlier talks. I want to talk now about a myth because it relates exactly to what we're trying to get to, and that is the myth of Demeter and Persephone. If you remember, the myth of Demeter and Persephone was the myth that was the basis of the Eleusinian mysteries, which were celebrated for 9 days at midsummer in the woods outside of Athens, at the same place, the same woods outside of Athens that the Midsummer Night's Dream takes place in. But if we remember, Persephone is raped by Hades, who takes her down to Tartarus and makes her his queen. And because she ate 3 seeds from a pomegranate, she has to return. But when she is down in the underworld, Demeter, her mother, will not allow anything to live on earth, and the earth would be barren, and everything would die, and the gods would have no one to worship them. So they swing a deal so that part of the year Persephone lives in the underworld with Hades, and part of the year she lives up above with Demeter, her mother. When she lives with her mother, the whole world is fruitful. Now, this is clearly something, these kinds of myths, I just chose Demeter and Persephone because it's the one that most people are most familiar with. These kinds of myths, you can go as far back as there is recorded history, and you'll find the same mythical theme. And this is the way things are, and the way they were in the pre-Christian world. If we understand this, Persephone represents the etheric body of the earth. And part of the year, Hades represents the divine spirit inverted as the physical earth, And part of the year Persephone is drawn down into the earth near the group spirit of the plants. And then part of the year Demeter, as the life spirit, draws her back up through the incidence of the sun's rays. Now this has been going on and will continue to go on as long as there is a physical earth. That there is this, hemisphere by hemisphere. One hemisphere it withdraws and it comes out in the other. And you know that it actually works right into the elementary ethers themselves? You know that the extreme ethers are active in winter time. Like the reflecting ether and the chemical ether are most active in winter time, because the chemical ether, because everything freezes, everything goes to crystal. Or people dream about next year's garden. Or they do their inner work like we're trying to do with this series of talks. In the summertime, it goes to the central ethers. The life ether and the light ether, all the colors come out and everything is verdant and alive. So not only is there the Demeter and Persephone myth working with the etheric body of the earth, but right within the ethers there is a polarization that takes place. This is an interesting thing. That's too many side trips, I guess. Now, Persephone wasn't the only one to go into the underworld. We know also that Orpheus went into the underworld. Shortly after his wife was struck in the heel by a serpent, she died, and right at the time of the marriage ceremony, Eurydice was struck in the heel by a serpent, and she died. And Orpheus, as you remember, was the greatest of all of the musicians known. He could sing and move stones and sing and have trees dance, and he could sing and tame wild animals. He was an amazing musician. But Orpheus descended into the underworld, into Tartarus, and went to Hades and played such beautiful music for Hades that he won his wife back with one condition. The condition was that he not look back at her until they get all the way up to the upper world. And what happens is he plays the music. Daisy and I were reading poetry the other night, and we read a Rilke poem on this very subject. He plays the music, and they go all the way up to the top, and he gets out into the sunlight of the world, and then just at the last moment, just as she's taking her first step out into the sunlight, he looks back. And because he's looked back before she's gotten into the sunlight, she goes all the way back, and his chance is completely lost. This has to do, Orpheus, as we know, was the founder of most of the Greek mysteries. Pythagoras openly admitted that all of his initiations were due to Orpheus. Plato was an Orphic. In fact, Plato took all of his mathematical ideas from the Orphics. The Orphics are tremendously deep mystery schools. Daisy, without knowing it, let me have a book or two out of her library, and one of the treasure books of my life is on Orpheus that she gave me a few years ago. And this failure of Orpheus has to do with what could be called the Orphic impossibility. And that is, it's impossible to bring something from the underworld to the upper world, and to bring something from the upper world to the underworld. Now, there are two ways that we can look at this myth, and that is, one, we can do it the way the Platonists did. The Platonists and the Neoplatonists were a mystery school, a very profound mystery school. And of all of the mysteries that I've ever read from any source of any kind, the Platonists are the great interpreters of myths. They have book after book after, and most of the books aren't translated. Though a lot of the best material by Proclus is still down in the archives of the British Museum. And they have interpretations of myths on many levels. You know when Max Heindel said that you can interpret a myth and it has a different meaning on each of several levels? This is exactly what the Orphics do, and they all of their students were supposed to do likewise. The way the Orphics most looked at it is they looked at this world as the underworld, because it was underneath all of the spiritual worlds. And they saw Persephone being raped by Hades, the process of incarnation. This is exactly the same. They even called the physical body the sarcophagus, in the same way that in the spirit of the Orphics is perfectly reflected in our funeral service. When Max Heindel says that truly this is a vessel of clay and we should rejoice when somebody throws off this vessel of clay. Now there's another way of looking at this same myth. If we take the underworld to mean the world that is underneath or beneath or behind our consciousness, it then means all of the spiritual worlds. That they're under our consciousness. Now the impossibility is the consciousness of this world can't be taken into the inner worlds, and the consciousness of the inner worlds can't be taken into this world. They're two totally different kinds of consciousness, and that's what the Orphic impossibility represents. I think even a minimal experience wakingly in the desire world, I think the first thing that would come to someone's mind is, this isn't anything like Max Heindel said it would be. But then after it sinks in, one would say to oneself, how could he bring that clear of objectivity out of something that is this complicated? You see what I'm trying to say? To go into those worlds is a much different kind of consciousness. You just can't take back and forth really what is between those worlds. Now, when Christ came into the vital body of Jesus, that wasn't a solution to the Orphic impossibility, but it did do something to change things. Ethers still rise and fall in the Persephonic cycle, but something happened at the very heart of the ethers. That is, there became an internal guidance mechanism. The macrocosmic vital body of the earth was changed. It was greatly altered, and what it did in the individual vital body, see, we're again at the point here, I'm trying to bring a whole bunch of things together. The incarnation of Christ as a sacrifice of love, in the same way that retrospection is a sacrifice of love, when it would be so much easier to go to sleep or to plan for tomorrow, we unspin. And that unspinning causes a stratification in our etheric bodies. And the work of Christ in the incarnation of Jesus changed the earth so that there is an internal guidance in the earth, a drawing in of the higher ethers, and an access or an availability peer-to-peer for that etheric substance to come to us. And so we get uplifted. Truly, our consciousness goes with the two higher ethers, and we get uplifted out of our physical or out of our normal attachment with the ethers. And you understand why this same act, the effect of it is, this is what opened the mysteries to everybody. Because before Christ, you had to be born in certain types of families where you could get the hereditary conditions where the etheric body was loose from the physical. But when Christ came into the etheric body and brought in the unspinning, the sacrifice by love, then any of us can stratify our vital bodies, and any of us can take initiation if we're capable of putting forth the effort, which means if we're capable of loving every day so that day by day we become purer and bring the better stuff in our vital desire bodies and such like that. Okay. Oh, we're going along. This is only going to take about an hour. Maybe a little over an hour. Not so bad. It's not going to be a long talk at all. Also, the way Christ works into our etheric bodies, it works into the flow of the ethers up and down the spine. I don't want to talk too much about that because that could be a very dangerous thing. But from the place in the skull, when Christ says, "Follow me," that's available to all of us now. So these are just little en passant things about upliftment, because I want to get back to the macrocosmic view of things. In previous talks, we've talked about the statements of the biblical Christ when that being says, "I am the way, the life, and the truth." Early on, we saw that light of truth that permeates all of our ideas. We saw that light, which is a light that is not like, we can't see that with the physical eye. We can only see that with the eye of spirit. We saw that that was a representation of Christ. And we said that the life spirit transcended the human spirit, and it was the truth that was in truths, that it was the truth that was within principles. And we looked at the statement of Christ as being a very literal statement when he says, "I am the way, the life, and the truth." Now we've looked at all those things, but we neglected part of that because Christ is also literally the way. And by that, I don't mean necessarily, but this is true also, it's uplifting, emulating the life of Christ as we can in the modern world. It takes a lot of extrapolation to live the Christ life in the modern world compared to the version we get of it in the Bible. But I want to look at this in a much more direct way. When Christ entered the vital body of the earth and came within by being in the vital body of Jesus, Christ became the focus of the earth. And from the viewpoint of cosmology, Christ is the leader and Christ is the way. That is to say, the love wisdom that imagines all of the phenomenal things that we experience is now the guiding intelligence for all of our earth. Now we saw earlier that Paul says the end of the law is love. And we noted that Christ was the judge of the so-called quick and dead, and that Christ as the Lord of destiny, or as the leader of destiny, does not carry out the letter of the law, but the purpose of the law, the loving ends of it. Now, when Christ entered the ethers and stabilized the earth, we've been saying that in that process the ethers have been changed. In fact, all of the life spirit and all of our life spirits, foci of life spirit, have been changed. We've been saying all along that there is no freedom in isolation. That's independence, which is the antithesis of freedom. And now what we're saying is that there is no upliftment in isolation. We're all being uplifted, and we are all uplifting together. Let's return to our opening statement. Christ, the biblical Christ, said, "If I be lifted up, I will bring or uplift the world to me." So this brings us back to the microcosm. The biblical Christ also says some other things. The secrets that have been from the foundation of the earth will be shouted from the rooftops. We're at our very best when we are shouting from the rooftops. In fact, we should almost call ourselves the Rosicrucian rooftop shouters, because you know what I'm trying to say. It's a great blessing to be able to share these things and to pour them out. But now, rooftop shouters haven't always been treated or haven't always been blessed, or it apparently seems that way. If we remember from Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a rooftop shouter. Sisyphus told the mysteries to the world. And for that reason, in Tartarus, the underworld, meaning the spiritual worlds, he was sentenced to take and push this boulder up to the top of the hill, which as soon as it got up to the top of the hill, it rolled down the other side, and he had to do the same thing all over again. Now, that doesn't seem really very fair for a rooftop shouter, but then if we think about it, the way Jesus was treated wasn't very fair either. This was a loving, completely innocent being, and they let a murderer loose in lieu of him. But we know that there's another meaning to the Christ story, and there's another meaning to the Sisyphus story. If we think of the mountain as the azimuth, or as the Tropic of Cancer, and if we think of the stone as the sun, then what Sisyphus is doing is pushing the sun up to the top of the hill every day and every year in the annual circle. But that's from the earth point of view. If we look at it in objective reality, the sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't come north. It's the earth that does the moving. What this myth is saying is that Sisyphus was allowed to be a mover of the earth. And that's what we are becoming, because in the upliftment process, we are doing the things that Christ did. Christ said, "The things that I do, you shall do also, and greater." And so it turns out that the myth of Sisyphus is the myth of us. We shout from the rooftops the mysteries, and as we do so, we get to push the stone up the hill. Only we know it's not a repetitious thing the way the myth would have us believe. We know that it's a joyous thing, because with Christ, every day is new. It's born afresh. It's not a dull, repetitive thing. It's all new. Okay, we're almost done. Now, the way of Christ is not exactly the way we conceive of it in astronomy now. In astronomy now, it is a repetitive thing. You know, the planets go, it's a pretty big kaleidoscope, but they all go in the same patterns. As mystery students, we know there are two kinds of astronomies and two kinds of astrologies. One is horizontal, one is vertical. The horizontal one is common to this plane. It's common to this plane that we call the ecliptic. But that's also part of the vertical one. The vertical astronomy and astrology is a mystery astrology. It's within the other, and the two of them do unite in one place. The other is a mystery in astronomy and astrology that has to do with different kinds of revolutions. Revolutions through the various globes, through the various planes, and constantly producing new conditions for all of us as evolving beings. So this is found in periods, it's found in globes, it's found in revolutions, it's found in 400-year cycles, it's found in planetary days, planetary years, planetary hours. All of this other type of astrology, which could be called a revolutionary astrology, exists side by side. And that is as important of an astrology as the physical one, because eventually the physical or the horizontal astrology, we know when the voice of truth becomes so strong that it sounds like the voice of a trumpet, that sometime this physical is going to dissolve. But we also know at the hour no man knoweth, and one of those things that comes up again and again in the Gospels, it comes like a thief in the night. When that happens, we're told that we will be uplifted to a new heaven and to a new earth. The biblical Christ says that if the temple be torn down, I will build it up in 3 days. We know that that is the temple of the physical body that is uplifted in the third day. That has to do with the Christian mystic initiation. But it also has to do with the temple of the earth. You can associate it with the days being precessional periods, and you have to wonder whether you use inclusive or exclusive reckoning when you count the days. There's enough there to make it ambiguous. You know, the ancient Jews, when they counted on the third day, they used the inclusive reckoning. The point is that we know that we live our life here day by day, and we get better. But we also know that this isn't enough for us, that we want something more. We're aspiring. We know that we go through cycles from the physical plane to the third heaven, the region of self, the region of ideational consciousness, and we do this cycle over again and again. But since Christ has had this experience in the etheric worlds, we hear that call from the etheric worlds, and the work of Christ is our work. And the more we can bring ourselves to work in the etheric realms, then we get deeper into the Christ mystery, deeper into the Christ initiation, and the whole cycle changes for us. It gets uplifted. Then we function between the ethers and the life spirit. So we have now made our transition from looking at the transcendental work down to our daily work. We have looked a little bit at the upliftment from a number of points of view, from the physical now to the etheric, from the self to the Christ, and the cycles of creation in that. The question is to ask ourselves the question that Hamlet asks. Hamlet gives the best answer. The readiness is the all. Are we ready? Do we have the consciousness that we always love, even when people are being very hateful to us? Do we have the consciousness that we could be awake all the time, or do we still want to escape into sleep? Do we have the consciousness that we're ready to live in life all the time and to be growing peacefully as the plants grow in the etheric kingdom? Those are the questions to ask ourselves, and that is about, I guess, about all I have to say about the upliftment. Tomorrow we'll try to look at consciousness.